Coming up on Philosophy Talk, global justice.
Why worry about global justice when we haven't achieved justice in our own nation?
Well, there are rich and poor nations and rich and poor citizens around the world, and that seems to lots of people unjust.
Justice is fairness. The same rules apply to all.
Well, first of all, does it even make any sense to talk about justice on a global, transnational scale?
Justice is equality. Everyone gets the same share.
And second, even if you think it does make sense, how do you bring that about?
Equal rights, justice, and equal rights and justice.
You're under arrest! Guard! I want to see my ambassador. Easily done. He's in the next cell.
Where do our duties to citizens of other nations begin and end?
Achieving global justice. Coming up on Philosophy Talk.
After the news. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're coming to you from the studios of KALW San Francisco.
Continuing conversations that began at Philosopher's Corner on the Stanford campus.
Today, global justice and human rights.
Well, can I feel the way about global injustice that's the Supreme Court's Potter Stewart felt about hardcore pornography?
Oh, that's a strange analogy, John. What, did he really like it or really hate it or what? What are you getting at?
Well, that's beside the point. What he said was that he really knew it when he saw it, but he didn't know how to define it. That's how I feel about global injustice. Disparities in income, famine in a world awash with food, genocide, ethnic cleansing, dozens of other things. They strike me as clear cases of global injustice. But when it comes to defining a concept of justice and injustice that makes sense in a global setting, I'm at a loss.
Well, I don't quite see why you're at a loss. It's just the absence of all those disparities and inequality that you talked about. It go back to John Rawls, who thought of justice as fairness, right? I mean, people deserve equality. They deserve equality of treatment, equality of access to important goods and services, political equality. A little bit of inequality is okay, John Rawls said, if it makes a difference to everybody, if it makes it even the least well off better off than they would be. Why not just think of global justice that way?
Well, justice as fairness is a great idea, and I can get a start that way. I mean, sometimes we say life is unfair, and we clearly have global unfairness and inequality in that sense. All the things I mentioned. So if global justice is global fairness, I guess it's clear we have global injustice.
So what's the problem about defining global justice then?
Well, the problem is that philosophers like Rawls are basically talking about the fairness or unfairness of a system of laws, not about life in general. We might say our Constitution is just or unjust, but there isn't a Constitution for the world. So how do we apply that concept of justice? Maybe global justice or global injustice is just a metaphor. Global injustice is just a fancy way of saying life sucks for many people around the world.
I mean, I see your point. I mean, life does suck for many people around the world, but I don't really think things are quite as hopeless as you make it sound. And we can look around the globe and say that various systems of laws that people are governed by are more or less unjust. There's clearly a lot of global injustice in that sense because so many countries are governed by completely just systems, but others are governed by wildly crazy unjust systems of laws.
Well, you're right about all that. But it seems to me there's a lot of global injustice over and above that. Example, the laws of India may well be as just as the laws of Norway. But it seems unfair that Norwegians, with all their fish and oil and land and clear skies, not to mention good looks, enjoy a very high standard of living. And Indians, some of whom are also very good looking, by and large do not. How does the concept of justice as fairness of a system of laws get at that sort of injustice? Unless we really have a system of laws for the whole world.
Well, and I mean, the very idea of a systems of laws for the whole world runs up against another problem, the problem of relativism. I mean, does it really make sense for members of one culture to morally criticize the system of governance of another culture? Well, I mean, we think equality of individuals is really important in the West. In the Chinese tradition, I'm told, that value is eclipsed by the needs of groups in a way we Americans wouldn't approve of.
Exactly right. For example, does it make sense for us to say, as many people do, that the Chinese limitations on family size, so that you're only supposed to have one child, To say that those limitations are unjust, the violation of rights,
Well,
it may make perfect sense from the point of view of their concepts and traditions.
well, like you said, we know global injustice when we see it, and we sometimes feel, in addition, a moral responsibility to do something about it. But right now we could use some expert help in defining concepts, I think.
Lucky for us, we have Helen Stacy from Stanford Law School to help us out here.
We'll start with what we know when we see it. That is, some clear examples of human rights tragedies around the world and what's been done and not been done about them.
Then we'll try to get more philosophical and more practical at the same time. What sorts of interventions are appropriate, and by whom? And what is the philosophical basis of this appropriateness? When is it permissible to use force? Given the pluralistic nature of human conceptions of right and wrong, how can intervention in somebody else's affairs ever be justified?
And then we'll try to diagnose the lack of success of the international community in preventing and ending human rights abuses. But first, let's turn to our roving philosophical reporter, Polly Stryker, who found a man who has experienced severe human rights abuses firsthand. She files this report.
It may have taken 13 years to arrest the Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic, but the war in the former Yugoslavia seems like yesterday for Fahim Fazlić, a Bosnian Muslim refugee in California.
He stole 16 years of my life. There is no price for that.
Mr. Fazlić worked as a labor lawyer in Prijedor, a city of about 50,000 in the western part of Bosnia near the Croatian border. His wife worked as a lawyer also, and the couple had 2 small children. Fahim says they had a good life.
It was a really nice job. We made good money. We had a nice apartment, car, spending time on the Adriatic Sea, traveling around. It was a really, really good time, and I just can't forget that, I'm still thinking about those days today.
Everything changed for Mr. Fazlić and his family in 1992. As Tito's socialist Yugoslavia dissolved, Serbian nationalist forces began a war to form a new Serbian state, with borders that included land in Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia. Serbian leaders intended the new state to be quote-unquote pure, Serbians only. Ethnic cleansing of Muslims and Croats began.
Army, then paramilitary troops, police, took power in my city. This very same day, they started putting people into concentration camps and put me in concentration camp called Omarska. 2 weeks after, they took my wife too. It was a man camp, but there was around 36 women. They used them during the day to work in the kitchen and during the night for their own pleasure.
Omerska, 15 kilometers from Prijedor, drew international outrage when journalists managed to visit the camp and publish pictures of emaciated men held behind razor wire.
Once a day we had a lunch and we had a minute, just 1 minute to eat. And 24 hours a day, they just think about the worst way to kill someone. One night they killed 168. And it was killing all the time, killing and beating, nothing else.
Bowing to international pressure, Serbs closed the camp. Fahim and his wife were transferred to another camp before being released to a transit center on the condition that they and their family leave Bosnia for good.
When I today think about those days, I can tell you that 90% of my friends were Serbs. I am Muslim, but I am not right Muslim, I never prayed, I never went to mosque, I don't know how to do that, And as I said, 90% of my friends were Serbs, and that's I'm so surprised that they did that to us.
Both Fahim and his wife have testified about what happened to them in front of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. He bristles at the sentences of 5, 6, or 7 years handed down to lesser players in the war, camp guards and the like. He was surprised at Karadzic's arrest and expects to be called to testify in The Hague when the trial begins later this month. What would justice look like to Fahim Fazlić?
Unfortunately, there is no death sentence, but there is a life in prison, and I think that he deserved not just one, 5 or 10 life sentences. And I hope that this trial will send that message to others, Karadzic and Mladic, that it's not worth and that they one day will be punished for that.
For Philosophy Talk, I'm Polly Stryker.
I'm John Perry, and with me is Ken Taylor.
Our guest is Helen Stacy. She's a professor from the Stanford University School of Law. She's author of Postmodernism and Law, Justice in a Fragmenting World. Helen, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Hi, Ken. Thanks for having me on.
So Helen, you're trained in the law, but instead of helping big corporations with their taxes, you somehow got involved in issues of global justice. How did that happen?
Well, I have another life as a lawyer where I was in a courtroom. I had a life as a criminal prosecutor. I was in Australia and the United Kingdom working on cases which in the United States would attract the death penalty, murder, multiple rape and manslaughter trials.
Wow. And how did you get from there to global justice?
Well, one problem with being a busy lawyer is that you never get the chance to think about the big questions. It seemed terribly important to me to be able to step back and really figure out why all of these complicated institutions that we have, like law courts, can't seem to ever really stop the problems.
So Ken and I, in our opening, talked about some of the philosophical issues that the concept of global justice gives rise to, in particular relativism and pluralism. But maybe we should start, with some examples of global injustice. We've certainly got a nice one from our roving philosophical reporter with Fahim. What are your paradigm examples?
Well, first thing to say is that with the ICTY and the ICTR, these international tribunals, the world is focused on global justice, which is looking like genocide or ethnic cleansing. And that's certainly one version of global injustice. But there are other inversions, like female genital cutting or people's inability to access clean water. It takes all sorts of different forms. It's a huge problem.
When you say people's inability to access clean water, for example, that's clearly a tragedy. It makes us sad and makes many people want to do something about it. But why is it a matter of global justice or injustice? I mean, I don't quite see the connection between tragedies over here and global justice or injustice.
Well, Ken, you raised roles earlier on. If you go back to the Sudan right now and ask how it is that people are being killed and raped, you could say it's an argument over resources, it's an argument over oil, it's an argument over water, it's an argument over who should be able to control access to those resources. So the little things really start to add up, and before you know it, you have tyrants who want to be able to tell people who can have what.
Right, I understand that, So, but some people live in situations, terrible situations. Let's grant that, right? But when we talk about it in terms of global justice or injustice, that means the rest of the world has some kind of obligation to do something about it or correct it or ameliorate it. And it's not just a local tragedy. What distinguishes a local tragedy from a situation of global injustice is what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, I'm trying to push back, Ken, and say that there is no distinction between global and local. Let's take a very recent case here in the United States. A man in Atlanta was convicted of assaulting his 2-year-old daughter, who he'd strapped to his Atlanta kitchen table, and he snipped off her clitoris. Now, this was something that could be prosecuted in the United States. He's from Ethiopia. When the case was hit the air in Ethiopia, the Prime Minister said, well, it's a tragedy this happened, but you can't expect us in Ethiopia to prosecute everybody here for doing the same thing. It's part of our cultural practice. So what happens at home also has consequences overseas and vice versa.
Right, and we'll have to take this up and dig into it. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today we're discussing global justice and human rights with Helen Stacy from the Stanford University School of Law.
We're all part of the global community. Most of our listeners, like us, probably reside in countries that count as the haves rather than the have-nots. What are our responsibilities to the rest of the global community and why? Tell us your thoughts. Join us by calling toll-free 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917.
Philosophical concepts of global justice, along with practical problems and solutions, plus your calls and emails when Philosophy Talk continues.
None of us are free. None of us are free. One of us are chained. None of us are free.
What would it take for us all to be free? Do you think a country like the U.S. ought to have just a focus on keeping its own house in order? Or should we be majorly involved in trying to achieve freedom and justice for the rest of the world? Tell us what you think. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor, and this is Philosophy Talk. Is the United Nations, for example, the answer or the problem? Is armed intervention to stop genocide acceptable? How about armed intervention to secure regime change when there is a cruel dictator? What do you think? The toll-free number is 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Or email us at comments@philosophytalk.org.
Our guest is Helen Stacy from the Stanford Law School. Helen, I want to pick up with the topic we were on when we took the break. So you gave us two examples of female genital mutilation and bad water. And my reaction to both is similar. That's horrible. It shouldn't happen. And second, we ought to do something about it. But philosophically, they seem quite different. In our Bill of Rights, we mostly have rights to protect us from the government's doing things to us. And then Franklin Roosevelt came along and said, well, we also have these other rights, the right from want, freedom from fear, freedom from want, and so forth. Aren't the philosophical bases of saying that female genital mutilation is unjust and we ought to do something about it quite different than the idea that it's unjust and unfair that some people have good water and others don't?
John, I'm going to turn lawyer on you. I'm sorry about this, but we really have to start drawing some distinctions. First of all, female genital cutting, I think that's the less controversial term, is something that usually takes place in the community. It's usually carried out by a family member. And even though a country may have laws that criminalise it, those laws are rarely enforced, often because the government simply doesn't have the capacity to roam around and arrest people, but also because it's culturally acceptable for that activity to take place. That's a different category from a government having the responsibility to expend its taxes on getting clean water to everybody. So remember, we have to figure out if we're talking about a government's responsibility to its citizens, or we're talking about a government's responsibility to try and ensure that there are community values which are kept to one standard.
Wait. So I'm a little. I like the distinction, but I don't quite see where it goes philosophically yet, right? Because one of the things I might think of, I'm thinking of this. I can evaluate morally all kinds of systems with my values, and both of these things seem to me. The female genital mutilation, I won't be neutral here, seems to me horribly wrong, right? And I wouldn't endorse it, I wouldn't do it. Now, if there's a culture, suppose there was a culture over there that unreservedly endorsed this, right? I don't think that's factual, because I think a lot of women around the world just are powerless to stop this. But let's ignore that for one moment. Suppose there was a culture that unreservedly endorsed this. Now, even though I thought it was wrong and terrible, what would justify me stepping in and saying, hey, you guys, you got this backward benighted culture, don't do this?
Well, nothing would justify you at all, Ken. Remember, you're an individual, and under the United States system, only nation states have any status at all.
What would justify the United States imposing its values on this other?
Legally, absolutely nothing at all. Remember, I'm going to go back to the United Nations Charter. Under the UN Charter, it's nation states which are entitled only to take any sort of military action if there is a threat to peace and security. There is no legal basis and there's no philosophical basis for military intervention for everyday human rights.
So in other words, with respect to something like female genital cutting or mutilation, we ought to try to convince, I guess we ought to try to convince other countries or other nations or other cultures to change their way of looking at it. But we don't really, going in and saying, stop that or we'll blow you up, there's no basis for that.
Let me put my cards on the table. I'm a card-carrying liberal. This means that I think the only power I have is to seek to persuade others to agree with me. But as a liberal, I can't force others to adopt my point of view.
Well, but you believe in force to stop genocide, I think. Take it.
I believe in force under the United Nations Charter to stop a government from mutilating or committing genocide on its own people. I don't give a green light to a government to simply march into another country and say, well, we don't like the way you're being ruled. We'd much rather our system of government than yours.
So you're basically a card-carrying liberal, and I'd like to get one of those cards. If you know where I got. But,
They're free.
Yeah.
It comes from your conscience.
But you do think the United Nations exists and does give us both a legal and philosophical basis for some kinds of interventions, basically to stop armed aggression and genocide. But beyond that, it's not there.
Look, the United Nations is a wonderful idea. It's a fabulous institution. However, we all know that the United Nations is muscle-bound. It has a Security Council with 5 permanent members. 2 of those members, Russia and China, have the power to exercise its veto. Long story short, this means we can't rely on the United Nations to militarily intervene. But aren't we getting off the subject
You're
here,
right.
guys?
Well, first I wanted to say 1-800-525-9917. That's the number you can call to join this conversation. 1-800-525-9917. I wanted, because the United Nations is a institution intact that we founded. It can be perfect or imperfect. I want to get back.
Who's we?
Well, the nations of some nations of the world. I want to get back to the abstract
The Allied
questions.
States after
I want to
World
get
War
back
II.
to I want to get back to normative questions, not sort of factual questions. What ought to be? Because even your liberalism, I want to push back on this. You say, well, we don't have any right. Well, certainly under UN Charter or something like that to intervene. But maybe the UN Charter isn't an instrument of global justice. Think about a society, right? And there's a criminal down the street breaking into a house and trying to steal the goods, right? And the police are supposed to go and stop that guy. And they're supposed to go anywhere in that polity, right? In that society, because they're an instrument of the good. Ought there not to be an instrument of the global good that isn't bound by the nation boundaries? You can't go into this neighborhood. It's my neighborhood. Ought there not to be an institution that's not bound by these silly national borders, which are just accidents of history and power imperialism anyway?
So there's no question when I speed on the 280 coming to tape this show that there's a police officer, there's a police force that has the right to arrest me and hold me to account. Do we want a global police force? I don't think so. Why? Not because there necessarily oughtn't to be one, but because it's too likely to fall into the wrong hands and do the wrong things.
But without one, we're going to have genocide here, oppression there, and only the powers of persuasion on our side.
But with one, maybe we'll just have global genocide. So let me put some labels in here since we're doing philosophy. Those are always handy. Now, you're a liberal. There's also a position called cosmopolitanism, and Ken sounds more like a cosmopolitan. He sees the world as a big community that should recognize that and have a single system of laws and maybe a police force. Do I have that right? On the other hand, the liberal position, the Rawlsian position, sees national boundaries and nation states even and states as an important part of the conception of justice. That if you just had the whole world, you'd be missing something. Is that right, or?
There's a problem here with the labels, and I think it's possible for a liberal such as me to have a cosmopolitan vision of what ought to be, but not seek to give a global police force or any particular country the power to act on those values. We do have to draw distinctions here. We might believe something, but do we want to give a government or the United Nations the ability to use guns to enforce that belief?
That's a very good question. 1-800-525-9917. What do you think about that question? Do we want a global police force, a global enforcer of the moral good? We've got callers on the line. Scott in Alameda. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Scott.
Yeah, hi. Thanks. Good morning. 2 points. First, on the specific example of female circumcision, we in the West do male circumcision all the time. So this is an example of what's good for the goose, you know. So that's the first thing, is that we actually have to abide by what we're trying to impose on someone else. The second thing is specifically what you're talking about just now with a global police force. I want to know two things. First, isn't it an all or nothing? Isn't it we have to give some level of government power to enforce basic human rights that we agree on by consensus? And number two, what is the philosophical basis for doing so?
Very good question, Scott. Ellen, I'm putting these questions to you.
Okay, let's look at the FGM example, or female genital or circumcision. You're quite right, the caller's quite right, to point out that hypocrisy is the recurrent theme in the global justice debate. It's very easy for those who have a strong voice, who are very militarily or economically strong, to wag the finger at other people and other cultures. That doesn't work philosophically. Do we want a global police force to be enforcing consensus? The difficulty here is, do we have international institutions which deliver us consensus? We don't yet have that. I continue to believe that it's possible to work for institutions which will have it one day. We don't have it yet.
Let me press this a little bit more, because I think it's a really important thing. And I don't know if I'm a cosmopolitan or not about this, because I said nations don't matter, but in some ways I think they really do, because they're kind of local collectivities that cooperate. They're schemes of cooperation and mutual dependence and all that, and that's important, right? And I don't want the Palo Alto police force, say, to be the marauding army for global justice. It's to serve our community. But think about this. Think about the American South and North in the antebellum slavery days. Right. Suppose the rest of the world had said, you know what, we got to get these Americans to end this silly institution of slavery, and that they had invaded to end this institution of slavery. Now, slavery is a deep wrong, but it would have been, I think, absurd for the world to think they could substitute for American political struggle to end this thing. And so I think it's a complicated thing. Lots of things are deeply wrong, but intervention can be a disaster as a way of addressing that wrong, because it tries to shortcut local politics.
I couldn't agree more, Ken. Of course nations matter. Nations matter because they're a constellation of history and interests and imagination and beliefs. But let's go back to the history question. Look at Africa. The history of Africa has made nations out of random lines on a map, which was essentially formed by Europe in the 19th century. So yes, of course, history matters. There was a wicked joke at the time of Hurricane Katrina that maybe France would respond militarily to all of those photographs of people standing on their roofs waving for the helicopters to come and pick them up. So you're right. What's good for the goose has to be good for the gander.
1-800-525-9917. Join our conversation. And John in San Francisco is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, John.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo the sentiments of the previous caller, saying that I don't think we should consider injustice on a global scale as long as we have injustice at home.
You don't think we should... What do you mean you don't think we should consider it, John? We should just be blind to injustice on a global scale?
No, I'm saying that we should consider injustice here. I mean, how can we be concerned with injustice in another country when we have it at home?
What do you think, Helen? Should we just be blind? I'm not sure if John's saying we should be indifferent to global injustice, but we should address locally first.
Well, I think we should do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can vote in our local elections whilst also seeking to give economic aid abroad. They're not mutually exclusive.
So in the context of the globe, we've got the United Nations, but there's also a lot of smaller organizations, organizations like the Organization of African States, regional organizations. And indeed, you might think that that's what the United States was originally. That is a group of states, each with their own practices, but with some things that they had agreed were the province of the collective. Is there room in international law for these not global but larger institutions to play a intervening and active role in a way that has more justification?
Well, John, they already are. Let's look at the European Court of Human Rights, for example. Europe used to be 7 nation states in the 1950s. It's now 27 nation states. The European Court of Human Rights has, unfortunately, a backlog of about 5,000 cases, many of them from the former Eastern bloc of people who are seeking their property back from the communists. The United States is a member of the Inter-American system. It doesn't contribute very much to it because it has its own vibrant court system. So, short answer is yes, there are lots of intermediate institutions and organisations where there are normative agreements about what should take place at a more local level.
I want to ask you about individual action versus... You said, well, in the response to something I said, well, I don't have any rights to intervene at all. We don't... Well, okay, suppose my nation is indifferent to these things, right, because of its political calculation. Does that let me as an individual completely off the moral hook? Do I have any obligations to the dispossessed, oppressed, brutalized peoples of the world to try and do anything to ameliorate their situation, even if my nation is... indifferent?
Yes, of course you do. And if your government isn't taking the right action, then you have a whole suite of things that you could do. One is to vote and to make your political voice known at home. Secondly, you can always give abroad. Last night when I was shopping at Trader Joe's, I bought cakes from the bake sale for the Chinese victims who are rebuilding their schools. There's always action that can follow from a moral obligation.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're discussing global justice and human rights with Helen Stacy from the Stanford University School of Law.
Our politicians talk a lot about international relations and what we should and shouldn't do in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Does this reflect America's concern for global justice, or is it just our concern for our own safety and oil supply? What should they be saying about global justice and our responsibilities?
Global justice, what should we do? When Philosophy Talk continues.
Is one standard of justice enough for the whole world? What's your conception of a just world? And how do you think we're going to get there? Or can we? I'm John Perry, and this is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything
except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. Our guest is Helen Stacy from the Stanford Law School.
So, Helen, we want to talk in this segment about what to do. So let's start by asking you, if we made you president or queen or dictator of the world just for 6 months, temporary job, then you're just like anyone else. and your mission was to institute a worldwide system that would, after you're done, guarantee or promote global justice. What would you do? Would you announce some rules for regime change, for example?
Sure. First thing I would do is promote. I don't know if there are any guarantees in life, certainly not on this topic. First thing I would do is work on world institutions. Now remember, we have a UN structure and we have nation states. I would like to see the intermediate institutions of regional human courts established. That would be the Inter-American system, the African system, the European system, Asia-Pacific system, something in the Middle East. Why would I do that? Well, I think in the West we have to be more comfortable with differential standards of human rights. I could well imagine that an African Court of Human Rights is going to make some different decisions on whether girls can marry at age 14 or 15 in a different culture. They'd still be operating within an international framework, so the objective would still be to work towards international United Nations goals, but maybe these are goals that take place over time.
I have to tell you, I'm a little pessimistic about all this stuff because I look at the world and I think a lot of the turmoil in the world comes from deeply divided polities that are deeply unstable with all kinds of historical grievances stored up, right? And we've got the Hutus and the Tutsis, and we've got Serbians and Croatians, and these fake states start exploding, imploding, coming apart, and all heck breaks loose. Now, what are we supposed to get a shared cosmopolitan vision of how we should live together? All those ethnic divisions and and hatreds have to somehow be overcome and submerged. And how's
No,
that
they
going to
don't.
happen?
They don't have to be overcome or submerged. They need to have institutions which can channel political voices, and there needs to be, of course, the ability to make sure that those institutions are enforced. So yes, there needs to be some level of enforcement.
Well, I agree with something I think implicit in what you said. Look, if everybody had kind of liberal democratic political theory tacitly, and we could make them endorse that, because liberal democratic theory is basically a way of people coexisting across diversity and plurality, right? If everybody had that implicit political theory, then we'd be done. But I don't think most people in the world have it.
Well, I think you're ultimately configured as an optimist or a pessimist, Ken. Maybe you're configured as a pessimist. I'm configured as an optimist. I think if you give individuals the opportunity to have a life that's free from bodily harm, where they're fed, where their children are educated, they will opt for that.
Yeah, but I mean, are we so sure that liberal political theory is the answer?
No,
I mean,
no.
I mean, I can imagine
Not necessarily.
I can imagine someone saying, "Look, liberal political theory has given us a lot of good stuff. The Enlightenment wasn't a total wash, but it's given us the idea that we can just overpopulate the globe if that's what individuals choose to do, and nobody can do anything about it. It's somehow managed to coexist with rampant materialism and huge international corporations that infect and corrupt politics. I mean, maybe something of a more Asian cast would be the best background philosophy for world government."
You know, if you ask an Asian what an Asian caste is, that would be a program all on its own. Look, it's not the case that there's one magic bullet and there's one magic political system. Of course there isn't. But I do think we have to get beyond caricatures of what liberalism is and what Asian systems are. That's not really going to help us. We have to keep working at the institutions. We have to keep disaggregating what seems to give communities the opportunity to channel their resources in ways that they choose, not just unfettered choice, but also with a view to the collective good.
I understand, and I've got a touch of optimism, but I agree with you, I've got a pessimistic cast, because I look at the history of the world, and I look at the history of any nation in the world, and it's a history of turmoil and struggle and finally reaching some modus vivendi that enables them to be stable for 100 years, 200 years, whatever, right? But then look at the history of nations interacting, and there's even more turmoil. And this late 20th, well, I don't know when the idea of global justice it's in the last 20 or 30 years that philosophers have started thinking hard about this stuff. But this idea of that there be global justice, it just seems to me.
Well, buckle your seatbelt, Ken, because the idea of global justice is simply going to increase. Why in the last 20 years? Because when the Tibetan monks get beaten up, we know about it on our cell phone.
Right.
So this is an idea that's grown legs, and it's just we have to learn to deal with it.
I agree, and I say in something I wrote once that the peoples of the world are in fraught moral contact with one another, and they can't help but asking this question.
Of course.
But they don't have many institutions or history of answering it successfully together as a cosmopolitan polity.
Well, I don't agree with that. The United Nations had the League of Nations before it, and nation states and individuals and groups have been negotiating and communicating
and
for
the League
millennia.
of Nations prevented Hitler's rise and Stalin's rise, and the United Nations prevented what exactly?
Now, go back to 2 questions ago, Ken. I said we have to disaggregate what worked from what didn't work. There isn't a magic bullet. There's just relentless, persistent working away at the big questions.
I mean, just to give the United Nations its due, people look at the big failures like Rwanda and Bosnia and so forth, where somebody else had to step in or nobody stepped in. But if you look at the agencies of the United Nations and the issues that the United Nations brings to the surface, there's just zillions of people that have cleaner water or more justice because of the United Nations. And so it's always very hard to say what did someone prevent, because if it didn't happen, you don't know about it.
I agree with you. And there's another thing about this mass communications and mass interaction. It's just not the nations of the world that are in fraught contact with one another. The peoples of the world, the individual. the media brings to your attention when it's working well, suffering everywhere. And you see this, and your natural tendency towards human sympathy, moves you. And so you see a movie like Hotel Rwanda that we're going to talk about later on, and you're just like horrified at what happens in the world on an individual, visceral level. So I think that's a vast improvement when you could basically be blind to the suffering of untold millions in previous ages.
Surely, if everyone in the world were trained to read Hume and be skeptical about all overarching concepts and claims, we'd be a lot better off. So that's my program.
So tell me, Helen, what do you think? Tell me more about reasons to be optimistic as your last thought.
Globalization isn't just some squishy idea of electronic communication and global economic systems. It's the ability to really know what's happening in other countries, for that to resonate with some of the problems in our own life, and as you say, to tap into that deep thread of human sympathy and to constantly battle with this sense of helplessness, of being overwhelmed by the enormity of the world's problems.
So do you think we're being made better human beings, more sympathetic human beings by the rush of globalization?
You are a closet Enlightenment rationalist, always moving steadily towards progress. Yes, of course I do.
Yes, well, on that note of optimism, I'm going to have to thank you for joining us, Helen. It's been a real pleasure.
You're most welcome. I've enjoyed it.
Our guest has been Helen Stacy, professor of law at the Stanford University School of Law, author of Postmodernism in Law, Justice in a Fragmenting World. So, John, old buddy, what did you learn today?
Well, it's always fun to talk to someone who's trained in the law, a lawyer who's also got philosophical interests and training and knowledge, because they have this peculiar combination of what Russell called a robust sense of reality and a sense of what's really possible and what the real institutions are, together with sensitivity for kind of the philosophical ivory tower issues that animate you and I.
Yeah.
And then when that person is an optimist too, what a great combination.
Yeah, because many of that breed are pessimists. I have this deep strand of pessimism in me. The kind of pessimism and optimism war with me. If you look at the long sweep of human history, it's hard not to be pessimistic. But if you look at the progress made in recent days toward democratization and this globalization of sympathy and all that, there's something that pulls on the optimist in me. So
yeah, we may have a good philosophical basis for global justice right about the time the world population collapses the whole thing into chaos. That's my optimism.
Well, John, I really never thought of you as an optimistic sort of guy. You got a kind of dark, brooding vision of much of the world, but you seem like you believe in the possibility of global justice and global progress.
I believe in the possibility of a lot of things, like me running a 4-minute mile.
Yeah.
Well, now I think it's time for Philosophy Talk to go to the movies. Ken, do you know any good movies about global justice?
Well, I know a good movie about a place where justice was not done. That's Hotel Rwanda, about the genocide in Rwanda.
Oh, I think that's a great movie, a very moving movie, and of course it's based on historical fact. And let's review the historical fact. Historically, there's a distinction in Rwanda between the Tutsis and the Hutus. And the Tutsis had traditionally been the elite, and the Hutus the non-elite. But the Hutus were in charge in the early 90s, and the Tutsis were rebelling against them. And at one point, one of the Hutu factions started a genocide against the Tutsis, and in the end, over 800,000 people were killed.
It is time to clear the brush, good Hutus of Rwanda. We must cut the tall trees. Cut the tall trees now!
But you can't really make a movie about genocide. I mean, to be the main text. So it's the subtext. It's really a movie about a heroic person who took great risk.
Sir, there's a call from the milk colony in Rwanda on line 1.
Yes? Who am I speaking to?
Yes, sir. Paul Rusesabagina, the house manager.
The hotelier, a very elite hotel, who sheltered many Tutsis from the rebels who were out to kill. They wanted to kill everybody, right? And so it's really about his personal drama and his family's drama and his own heroic acts.
And like Schindler in Schindler's List, like Oskar Schindler, Paul doesn't start out with the intention of being a hero. He doesn't have a hero's profession. He's not a priest or a United Nations colonel, like another character in the film. He's just a guy that runs a hotel.
Tassi, all day long I work to please this officer, that diplomat, some tourist, to store up favors. So if there is a time when we need help, I have powerful people I can call upon.
So you see this man using all of these kind of business tricks and slimy personal get around, go upstairs, bribe, all these tools in order to save lives.
There's another thing about the movie Hotel Rwanda that I think is very similar to some of the representations in Schindler's List, because Paul, I think like many, starts out not believing it could be this bad. Not believing. The first time his neighbors and his wife react with utter fear, he says, it's going to be all right.
I know you have had many things. And I know what we have seen, Thomas. But please, the United Nations are here now. The world press are watching. Tomorrow you will come by the house and we will discuss this with Tatiana. All right?
He just can't believe that anybody would go that far.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, there are elements of this that are more shocking than the Holocaust. At least the Holocaust happened at a time when there was some excuse for not intervening as it would require facing down Hitler. And there's some truth to the fact that the gravity of it wasn't known until the end. But none of those excuses in this case. Now, there's another analogy. You've made the analogy of Schindler's List. I'd make the analogy also to Huck Finn. There's one scene in it when Paul just has this moment where he says, I shouldn't be doing this. This is the wrong thing to do.
The first thing they told me when I received my appointment was to never lower the tone of the hotel. Maintain the Mikolin's dignity at all times, Paul. Soon all of this will be over. What if I lose my job, Tatiana?
His moral code is he is an employee of the Sabina company, the company that runs the hotels, and he's taking the money out of the safe and giving it in the form of bribes, and he's letting people stay in the rooms who are never going to pay the rent, although he dutifully gives them bills. And for a moment, you see, he thinks, this isn't right. So it reminded me a little of Huck Finn thinking, I'm doing the wrong thing here. I'm saving this slave.
And there's a beautiful scene where Nick Nolte, who plays this UN colonel, the Don Cheadle character, Paul, is thinking somebody's going to come and rescue us. Something's going to happen. And Nick Nolte says to Paul,
We think you're dirt, Paul.
Who is we?
The West, all the superpowers, everything you believe in, Paul. They think you're dirt. They think you're dung. You're worthless.
I'm afraid I don't understand what you are saying, sir.
Oh, come on, don't bull me, Paul. You're the smartest man here. You got them all eating out of your hands. You could own this freaking hotel, except for one thing. You're black. You're not even a nigger. You're an African.
As if they don't care one bit about you. I mean, it seems one of the things the movie demonstrates is that even when there's massive failure, right, massive failure of the nations of the world to do what they ought, and it's clear what they ought to have done, even when there's massive failure, still there's room for an individual to act and to make a difference. But it does say you can act to make a difference, but you can't make the whole difference. So individual action may be necessary, but it's not sufficient. And the nations of the world, to make global justice happen, it's not just a matter of individuals doing the right thing. I mean, the collectivities, the massive collectivities that there are in the world have to do the right thing.
Will the UN intervene to stop the bloodshed?
We're his peacekeepers, not his peacemakers. My orders are not to intervene.
Hotel Rwanda, 2004, directed by Terry George, starring Don Cheadle, Sophie Okonedo, and Nick Nolte, among others. Ken, it's fun talking about movies, but it's also fun to help our listeners talk about the philosophical problems that arise in their own life.
Yeah, if you've got a conundrum, you can send us an email at conundrums@philosophytalk.org. We won't promise to solve your problem, but we will give you lots of new ways to think about it.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2008.
Our executive producer is David Demarest.
Our production coordinator is Devin Strolovich. Daniel Elstein is our director of research. Lael Weiss is our webmaster. Also thanks to Zoe Corneli, Muriel Kessler, Corey Golden, and Mark Stone.
Philosophy Talk is sponsored in part by Powell's City of Books on the web at powells.com. Support also comes from the Templeton Foundation.
And from various groups at Stanford University, the Friends of Philosophy Talk, and the members of KALW San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed on this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
The conversation continues on our website, philosophytalk.org. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.